सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ श्री गणेशाय नमः। ॐ श्री सरस्वत्यै नमः। ॐ श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्परां। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पाद शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं। समस्तजनकल्याणे निरतं करुणामयं नमामि चिन्मयं देवं सद्गुरुं ब्रह्मविद्वरं। मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवं परमानन्दमाधवम्। सर्ववेदान्तसिद्धान्त गोचरं तमगोचरं गोविन्दं परमानन्दं सद्गुरुं प्रणतोऽस्म्यहम्। हरि ओम्। को नाम बन्धः कथमेष आगतः कथं प्रतिष्ठास्य कथं विमोक्षः को सावनात्मा परमः क आत्मा तयोर्विवेकः कथम् एतदुच्यताम्। The student had asked 7 questions to the Guru. Guru has answered 6 so far and is answering the 7th. So while answering the last question, tayoho vivekaḥ katham, how to discriminate between the self and the not self, the Guru, Bhagavan Shri Adi Shankaracharya Ji, took explanation of Panchakosha. So the methodology used right now is Panchakosha Viveka, the discrimination of the self from the 5 sheaths. And in that, we have seen Annamaya Kosha, food sheath, Pranamaya Kosha, vital air sheath, Manomaya Kosha, mental sheath. And we are seeing Vijñānamaya Kosha, intellectual sheath. Now the explanation of Vijñānamaya Kosha started from verse number 184, where Vijñānamaya Kosha was explained as having mainly 2 components. One is intellect, of course, along with the organs of perception, and another component is ahankara, the other side within the antakarana. So antakarana is 4-fold: mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankara. In that, mana and chitta are taken to be part of manomaya kosha, and buddhi and ahankara are taken to be part of this Vijñānamaya Kosha. Now, because ahankara is part of Vijñānamaya Kosha, this ahankara, ego, this jiva, this ahankara itself is called as jiva. This jiva was shown to be anadi. Anadi, having no birth or beginning. Now, based on this explanation, student asked one question. If jiva bhava is anadi, then it will never end. If jiva bhava never ends, then samsara will never end. If samsara never ends, moksha is not possible. That was the question asked by student. Okay, so the topic of Vijnanamaya Kosha is not yet complete. We have seen in each kosha that first Shankaracharya will explain what is that kosha, what is its special state, how does it function, and then will explain how this kosha is not the self and will give reasons, isn't it? Now here Vijnanamaya Kosha, he has not yet explained that point because the topic is not complete. Within that Vijnanamaya Kosha concept, because Jiva became the part of Vijnanamaya Kosha as Ahankara and it was shown as beginningless, so then Vijnanamaya Kosha will become beginningless, then the Upadhi will become beginningless, Jiva Bhava becomes beginningless, Samsara also beginningless. Then the student said, then none of this will end. So the teacher first answers this question. And what is the answer that we have seen in the last session? Just because something is beginningless doesn't mean it is endless. Why? Pramaniki na bhavati bhrantya mohita kalpana. In one line, the Guru had answered in the first verse itself, verse number 194 itself, where he said that imagination that is conjured up by delusion is not real. So Vijnanamaya Kosha or Jiva Bhava or Samsara, all of which you are explaining is Bhrantya Mohita Kalpana, is an imagination created by delusion, and therefore that delusion appears to be beginningless, but it ends when the reality is seen. Right? Other than this delusion, there is no actual connection between the self and Jiva. Bhrantim vinatu asangasya nishkriyasya nirakritehe na ghateta artha sambandha. There is no real connection with the world of the self. Nabhasaha nilatadivat. Like there is no actual connection of the space with the blue color. The space is not blue in color. It appears to be blue in color because of the limitation of the sight. Because the eye cannot reach it, the rays come back and show us blue color. But actually, the space and blue color have no connection. In the same way, the self has no real connection with samsara. Samsara is merely imagined on the self. Right? And therefore, since when the samsara is imagined on the self? Since before time. And therefore it is anadi, agreed. But it is not ananta, it is not infinite, it is not eternal. Why? Because the imagination will be removed when the reality is seen. Ignorance, delusion, individuality, samsara, all of these are minus infinity, beginningless in time, but are not endless. Simple example. My ignorance of Hebrew language. Hebrew is one of the South African languages. My ignorance of Hebrew language is beginningless. I am not talking about you all. Some of you may know Hebrew. I don't know. So my ignorance is beginningless. But it can end when I learn that language. Isn't it? So ignorance is beginningless but is not endless. We had seen another example. Darkness in the cave is beginningless, but it ends when I put on the light. In the same way, samsara is beginningless, but it will end when the reality is seen. Jiva bhava is beginningless, but it will end when Atma bhava will appear. Are you getting the connection? So the student's confusion was, if it is beginningless, it will not end. The teacher clarified, there is no such rule. Why? Because we are not talking about real thing which is beginningless. What we are explaining as beginningless is imagined thing, and therefore, though it is beginningless, it will end when the reality is seen. The snake appearing on the rope is beginningless, but that snake will end when the rope is seen. Right? Swasya drashtuhu nirgunasya akriyasya pratyagbodananda rupasya buddhehe bhrantya prapto jiva bhavaha. This individuality is also imagined by this bhranti, delusion. Na satya is not real, and therefore moha apaye, when this delusion is removed, na asti, it is not there. That jiva bhava individuality is not there. Avastu swabhavat, because of it being of unreal nature, and therefore it appears beginningless, but it is not endless because it is not there actually. Right? Yavad bhranti asti, yavad bhranti tavadeva asya satta. As long as there is delusion, so long alone it will be existence. What will be existent? Jiva bhava will be existent. Mithyajnana ujrimmitasya pramadat, because it is born from mithyajnana, wrong understanding, misunderstanding, delusion, ignorance, and therefore its existence is only as long as delusion exists. Rajvam sarpaha bhrantikalinaha eva. Just as the snake seen on the rope is only as long as there is delusion. Bhranter nashe, when the delusion is gone, removed, destroyed, naiva sarpaha asti. The snake doesn't exist. Tadvat, in the same way. Anaditvam avidyayaha karyasyapi tatha ishyate. So too, the anaditva, beginninglessness of ignorance and its effects, tatha ishyate, is only like that. Is only like that means what? It is only there as long as ignorance exists. Utpannayam tu vidyayam, when the knowledge is born, avidyakamanadyapi, everything, ignorance and all its effects will become non-existent, will end when vidyayam utpannayam, when the knowledge rises. Just now we saw one example. My ignorance of anything for that matter is beginningless. But when the knowledge takes place, that ignorance ends. Right? In the same way, ignorance of the self also is beginningless, but it is not endless. When the self-knowledge arises, the ignorance ends. Ignorance ends, jiva bhava ends. Jiva bhava ends, samsara ends. Therefore, oh my dear student, don't worry. All of them may be beginningless, but they are not endless. Why? Because they are born out of delusion, and when the delusion ends, they will end. One more example. Prabodhe swapnavat sarvam sahamulam vinashyati. You have seen in the dream so many things, but the moment you wake up, all of that ends. Anadi api idam na unityam. Though it is beginningless, it is not eternal. Agreed, it is minus infinity, but it is not plus infinity. In the past time, it is minus infinity, but in the future time, it is not up to infinity. It will end. It is not nitya. Pragabhavaha iva. Like a prior non-existence. Remember? Pragabhava, pradvamsabhava, anyonyabhava, atyanta bhava. 4 types of non-existence we saw. In that pragbhava is what? Prior non-existence. The object before it came to existence had prior non-existence. So there is a date of manufacturing for this watch, right? So before that date, the watch was non-existent. Correct? In other words, there was prior non-existence of the watch. Pragbhava. Now that prior non-existence was since when? Since always. Since beginningless of the time, the watch did not exist. So the prior non-existence was beginningless, but it ended when the object came to exist. Correct? Correct? So before the watch was manufactured, it was non-existent. And the non-existence of the watch was beginningless, but that non-existence of the watch ended when the watch came to exist. So pragbhava, prior non-existence, is beautiful example of something which is beginningless but has an end. Are you getting? In the same way, anadehe api vidvamsaha pragbhavasya vikshitah. Just as, though anadi, though beginningless, but end of this pragbhava, which is beginningless, is seen. Yad buddhi upadi sambandhat parikalpitam atmani jivatvam. In the same way that jivatvam word is to be taken from the next verse, verse number 201. This individuality, which is also beginningless, will have an end. Buddhi upadi sambandhat parikalpitam is imagined because of its association with the conditioning of the intellect. The self is, so to say, associated or identified with the intellect. This, so to say, connection is out of delusion, and that delusion created connection is beginningless, but it will end. When? 201 we saw last time. Tatah anyastu swarupena vilakshanah na. When you realize that I am not the jiva, I am the self. What is jiva? Jiva is considering the self to be identified with the koshas, with the upadhis. Considering, it is not real. The self actually has no real connection with upadhis. It is only delusion-based, ignorance-based connection. Now, when I consider it to be connected with the upadhis, identified with the upadhis, I am considering myself to be this jiva, individual, who is having this body, mind, intellect as upadhis. But when I realize that I am not the jiva, I am the self who has no connection with the upadhis, and that self is actually not very different from me. It is actually my own nature. Only because of misunderstanding, I have lost that connection. Sambandhastu atmanah buddhya mithya jnana purassaraha. So actually, what is the point? My connection with the upadhis is unreal, is not real. But my oneness with the self is real. Carefully see, carefully listen what I am telling. My connection with the upadhis, though appears real, is not real. And my oneness with the self, though appears unreal, is real. I am using two words. I am using the word connection and oneness. I am not saying connection with the self is real, because for connection, two things are required. Here, I am not different from the self to have a connection with the self. I am self. and I am not upadhis, and therefore that connection with the upadhis is unreal. Okay. Sambandhastu atmanah buddhya mithya jnana purassarah. That connection of the self with the upadhis, with the buddhi, is only created by mithya jnana, is only created by delusion, misunderstanding, wrong understanding. Are you getting it? Whereas my oneness with the self is eternal, is permanent. Not knowing this oneness with the self, I consider myself to be belonging to the upadhis and I come to suffer. The moment I realize that I am not this, I am that, my suffering ends. In my dream, I am captured by some goons, by some dacoits, and they are beating me left and right, and I am shouting in pain. That pain will end when? Not when the dacoits will stop beating me, not when somebody will come and save me, but when I will get up from the dream. Careful. The pain is not real. The pain is felt because of my identification with the dream body. I am considering myself to be the dream body, and therefore there are these dacoits who are beating. Actually speaking, who are the dacoits? Me only. The stick with which they are beating is also me only. The body that is getting beaten is also me alone. Everything is created by my mind alone. But not realizing this, I consider myself to be that dream body who is being beaten by the dacoits, by the goons, and I shout in pain. The sorrow, the suffering, the pain will end when I wake up. When I realize that I am not that dreamer who is getting beaten by the goons. I am the waker sleeping peacefully on my bed. The suffering that we have in this samsara will end when I realize that I am not this body, mind, intellect experiencing different experiences of the world, but I am that pure self. When I realize this, the suffering will end. The suffering is beginningless, agreed, but it will end when I realize that I am the self. Jiva bhava ends when atma bhava is experienced. Right? That is the point explained in the next verse. Let us see. Verse number 202. Vinivṛttirbhavettasya samyagjñānena nānyathā brahmātmaikatvavijñānaṃ samyagjñānaṃ śrutermatam. Vinivṛttirbhavettasya samyagjñānena nānyathā brahmātmaikatvavijñānaṃ samyagjñānaṃ śrutermatam. Tasya vinivṛttihi, vinivṛttihi. Nivṛtti means nivṛtti, destruction, you can say, or retirement, nivṛtti. Visheshena nivṛttihi, total total retirement, total destruction, tasya, of that. Of what? Of that jivatva. Total destruction of the individuality, bhavet, will be there, will happen when samyagjñānena, by right knowledge, samyak, perfect, well, jnana, knowledge. Individuality will be totally removed by the right knowledge alone, na nānyathā, not by anything else. And what is samyagjñāna? What do you mean by right knowledge? Brahma atma ekatvavijñānaṃ samyagjñānaṃ. Brahma, the supreme reality. Atma, the self. Ekatva, oneness. Vijñānaṃ, experience. Experience of oneness of Brahman and Atman. Samyagjñānaṃ is the right knowledge. śrutermatam, that is the declaration of the scriptures. That is the final. How will the individuality end? By realizing I am one with Brahman. Aham brahmasmi iti atma vijñānena. By experience of I am Brahman, I am Jiva, this wrong understanding will end. Are you getting? Important phrase here is na nānyathā, not by any other means. We just now saw in the example. My suffering in the dream will end not when the dacoits will stop beating me, not when the police will come and help me, not when the somebody will come and put ointment on my wounds, not when I will get to eat ice cream and therefore I will forget my problems. No, my suffering will end when I will realize that I am not the dreamer and I am the waker. This knowledge, this experience will end the suffering, will end the individuality of the dreamer. In the same way, right now all of us are suffering in the world in various different ways. Some of us may say that no, Vedji, we are not suffering, we are fine. Question is how long? How long you think you will be fine? Why? Because the world is like that, samsara is like that, life is like that, that the suffering is just around the corner if it has not already arrived. And therefore, that suffering will end only when we realize that I am not the sufferer. I am the self which never suffers. Only on realizing this, all the suffering will end. This realization, this experience, this knowledge, K capital, this is the oneness, this is the experience of oneness of the Supreme with the Self. This is called as samyagjñāna, right knowledge. By this right knowledge, the wrong understanding will end and therefore the suffering born out of wrong understanding. Only when I realize I am Brahman, I will give up my wrong understanding that I am individual. And only when I give up my wrong understanding that I am individual, I will give up all the suffering. So vinivṛttirbhavettasya, of that individuality, vinivṛttihi, the total destruction, bhavet, will happen samyagjñānena, by right knowledge alone, na nānyathā, not by anything else. And brahmātmaikatvavijñānaṃ, the experience of Brahman and the self, samyagjñānaṃ śrutermatam, is considered as right knowledge. This is the declaration of the scriptures. This is the conviction of the scriptures. Many times people ask this question, Veji, why not help the poor by giving food? Why are you wasting that money in organizing programs? See, I am sure some of you also have this doubt. Is it not better that rather than spending money on spiritual discourses, camps and publications, books, etc., why not give food to poor people? Why not adopt the children who are not having their parents? Why not do social service? Please understand, there is no problem with doing social service. It is good. But what we are doing is higher than that. When you give food to poor, of course it is a great action. It will, quench that person's hunger. 100% true. Suffering will be removed for some time. Agreed. When you give shelter, it will be removed for some more time. Agreed. When you give love, the suffering will be removed for some more time. Agreed. Everything is right. But when you give knowledge, especially the spiritual knowledge, the suffering will be removed once and for all. The suffering which has been going on for births together shall be removed. Please understand, when we are striving to get liberation, it is not a selfish act. Why? Because by realizing we are ending the suffering of ourselves and ending the suffering of all other people who are in contact with us. It is not a selfish act. Please keep this at the highest priority. Don't compromise on knowledge for anything else. See, when you are not having this knowledge transaction happening, when you want to practice this knowledge, please do social service. There is nothing wrong. It's all very good. It should be done. It's better than doing something selfish activity like watching some television or playing games on mobile. Of course it is good. But when compared with spiritual knowledge, nothing comes even closer. Why? Because the ultimate suffering will end only by self-knowledge. So what is the point which is mentioned now? The point mentioned is that the individuality will end only by the knowledge of the Supreme as my own self. And that end of individuality is end of samsara, end of suffering. Therefore, this samyagjñāna is what we must strive for. Now the question is, how to gain that samyagjñāna? How to gain that right knowledge? Next verse. Let us see. Verse number 203. tadātmānātmanoḥ samyak vivekenaiva sidhyati tato vivekaḥ kartavyaḥ pratyagātmasadātmanoḥ. tadātmānātmanoḥ samyak vivekenaiva sidhyati tato vivekaḥ kartavyaḥ pratyagātmasadātmanoḥ. that samyagjñānam. So the topic is, that is what is going on. brahmātmaikatvavijñānaṃ samyagjñānaṃ śrutermatam tat samyagjñānam, that right knowledge, sidhyati, is gained. How? atma anatmanoḥ vivekenaiva, by the discrimination, differentiation of the self and the not self. See how Shankaracharya is connecting. The main topic that is going on is the answer to that question, isn't it? Tayor vivekaḥ katham. So he comes back to that topic and says, please note what? That samyagjñāna, that right knowledge, that self-knowledge, that oneness, experience of oneness of Brahman and the self is how it is to be gained. It is gained by differentiating the self from the not self. It is only by that it is gained. Tatah, therefore, vivekaḥ kartavyaḥ, differentiation should be done. Should be done. What differentiation? pratyagātmasadātmanoḥ, between the individual self. Here pratyagātma means jiva, not the real self. Right? So between the jiva and sadātmanoḥ, between the eternal self. So understand that I am the eternal self and not the individual self. Distinguish between them. Differentiate between them. Who is the individual self? Individual self is the one who is identified with the upadhis. The eternal self is the one who is beyond all the upadhis, who is not even touched by the upadhis. Therefore, this distinction, this differentiation must be done. So this viveka segregating, differentiating the self from the not self. By this viveka, what will happen? Samyagjñāna will take place. Samyagjñāna, the right knowledge will take place. That right knowledge will end the jivatva or ajñāna, and that will give us moksha. Understand the logic, understand the sequence. Viveka will give samyagjñāna, which will remove ajñāna or jivatva and give us moksha. Is it clear? Therefore, viveka should be done. Now here is one homework. What is homework? Now onwards, any problem comes, try to find spiritual solution. What do you mean by finding spiritual solution? Who has the problem? Go on differentiating that from my real self. Example. Veji, what? I have a problem. What is the problem? Fever is not going. When the fever goes, cold comes. The cold goes, cough comes. Cough goes, then body pain comes. By the time body pain is over, fever returns again. Now, okay, take tablets, etc. All that is fine. Go to doctor and trouble the doctor and trouble all your family members. Do all that. I don't have any issue. But just ask this question, who has fever? The answer is Jiva, who is identified with the body, has fever. Why? Because the body has fever actually. And Jiva, being identified with the body, considers that I have fever. Now distinguish, I am the self and not the Jiva. Then who has the fever? Not me, the body. Let it have fever. Treat it. See, fever will remain, but suffering will be removed. You see? Fever will be there because fever will take time to go, but the suffering can be removed immediately. The suffering is because of the wrong identification. That can be removed immediately. The pain, etc. can continue for some more time. Let it continue. Anyways, body has that fever. Let it continue. Just as you use an instrument, like your pen, like your vehicle, like the different utensils that you use to cook, in the same way, use your body, use your mind, use your intellect like an instrument. So all the difficult situations are because these equipment These instruments of mine are suffering. Detach from them. Say that I am not the one who has these. I am the self. Then what? Then suffering won't be there. Remember, by saying that I am the self and not the body, the fever will not go. But the suffering from the fever will go. I have chronic headache. Gurudev used to explain very beautifully that some people have this chronic disease, no? The headache which is there for last 20 years, stomach ache which always is there, and he says that they will start explaining the intricacies of that headache so much that the other person also starts to feel that I also have a headache now. That much severe that you can transfer the headache. That much explanation is there. Now remember that disease may continue, but the suffering can end. Are you getting the point? Veji, what happens, because of this growing age, I am not saying old age, okay? Many people, suddenly say, no, I am not old. Okay, fine. Because of the growing age, what happens is, suddenly I feel very hungry. And when food is there in front of me, I don't feel hungry. So what? So problem. Now find the spiritual solution. Who is that who feels hungry? Who is the one who feels full? It is the pranamaya kosha. Because hunger, thirst is pranamaya kosha. I am not the pranamaya kosha. Veji, since pandemic, there is a underlying depression. Anything that I do, I am depressed. I am sad. Who is sad? Manomaya kosha. The mind is sad. So if I consider myself to be the self, will the mind stop being sad? May not. Let mind continue to be sad. What is your problem? You are not the mind. Let it continue to be sad. Oh mind, remain sad. I don't have any issue. Keep crying. Let it cry. But the suffering will end. Jagat will remain. Samsara will end. Are you getting? For this, tatah vivekaḥ kartavyaḥ. For this reason, viveka should be done. Now this viveka itself is a great sadhana. This is called jnana sadhana. Just as there are bhakti sadhana, japa, puja, dhyana, etc. There is karma yoga, sadhana is there, doing the duty, offering it unto Lord. In the same way, what is jnana sadhana? It is this. This is one of the jnana sadhanas, that whenever any difficulty comes, whenever any tough situation comes, distinguish. Who is the one having difficulty? Who is the one suffering? Am I that? This is the method that Raman Maharshi loved. Anybody would go to Raman Maharshi will dismiss the question only. My daughter-in-law is not listening to me. Please tell her something. Raman Maharshi will not tell anything to the daughter-in-law. Raman Maharshi will ask question, whose daughter-in-law? My daughter-in-law. Who are you? Gone. The moment you come to understand that I am the self and not the one associated with the body, mind, intellect, and therefore I have no connection with the world of objects or beings, what problems? Veji, India's 75th Independence Day just got over and India is suffering. Okay, so we should do something. Okay. Who are you? No. Veji, you are running away from the problem. You are not dealing with the problem. Arey, my dear, I am dealing with the root cause of all problems. You solve this, all problems will automatically get resolved. You name any big problem as a country we are facing, or as society we are facing, the root cause of all of that is selfishness, corruption, poverty. You take up any so-called problem. Where is the root cause? Root cause is selfishness. Selfishness means what? Considering yourself to be the body, mind, intellect. So you resolve that main root cause of all problems, and all the other problems will be resolved automatically. All the problems are born out of my wrong identification. If I remove that wrong identification, individual problems, totality problems, national problems, world problems, all of them will be resolved once and for all. Are you getting it? So spiritual solution is what we need to find, and that viveka we have to practice. Now this viveka that we are talking about is not creating the self. You are not saying that I am Jiva, now I have to become the self. No, I am already self. I have wrongly understood myself to be Jiva and therefore I am suffering. You remove that negativities or wrong understanding, I am already the self. That is what is explained in the next verse. Verse number 204. Let us read. Jalaṃ paṅkavadatyantaṃ paṅkāpāye jalaṃ sphuṭam yathā bhāti tathātmāpi doṣābhāve sphuṭaprabhaḥ. Jalaṃ paṅkavadatyantaṃ paṅkāpāye jalaṃ sphuṭam yathā bhāti tathātmāpi doṣābhāve sphuṭaprabhaḥ. What is the point? Jalaṃ paṅkavat. Paṅkavat jalam. Muddy water. Paṅkavat means what? Vatu pratyay here means having. Having paṅka. Paṅka means mud. Water having mud means muddy water. Paṅkavat jalam atyantam is extremely impure, unclear. There is another pathabheda. There is another reading of the text which says jalaṃ paṅkavad asphuṭam. In some texts you will see the word asphuṭam. Fine, both are okay. Asphuṭa means unclear, impure. The water which is having mud, the muddy water is unclear. Paṅkāpāye. But when that paṅka, that mud apāya is removed, jalaṃ sphuṭam, the water becomes clear. Means what? Impurity is when something other than it is mixed with it. That is called as impurity. The water is impure means what? There is something in the water other than the water. Actually speaking, water is not impure. Impurity is added. Water is pure only. You remove the impurity, water will be pure only. In the same way, yathā bhāti, just as it appears like this, tathātmāpi, so too Atma also, so to the self. doṣābhāve, when the faults, what are the faults? The faults of ignorance, delusion, identification, when all of them are removed, abhāve, in their absence, sphuṭaprabhaḥ, it is the one with clear sphuṭaprabhaḥ. Prabha is luster, effulgence, magnificence, brilliance, prabha. The self is always like that, but because of certain faults, it appears to be impure. it appears to be individual who is suffering. You see what a colossal loss. The self which is of the nature of bliss comes to suffer. How can the bliss suffer? It is not possible, but it happens because of this fault. This fault of ignorance, fault of delusion, fault of identification. You remove that fault, the self shines as brilliant consciousness. Right? The same point is explained in the next verse also. Let us read the last verse in the series of the teacher's reply. Let us see. Verse number 205. asannivṛttau tu sadātmanā sphuṭam.
asannivṛttau tu sadātmanā sphuṭam.
pratītiretasya bhavetpratīcaḥ.
pratītiretasya bhavetpratīcaḥ.
tato nirāsah karanīya eva. sadātmanasadvahamaदिvastunaḥ. asannivṛttau tu sadātmanā sphuṭam pratītiretasya bhavetpratīcaḥ. tato nirāsah karanīya eva. sadātmanasadvahamaदिvastunaḥ. asannivṛttau tu asat nivṛttau. When the unreal asat nivṛttau is removed, when the not self is removed, sadātmanā. Etasya pratīcaḥ. I am rearranging the words in the first line. asannivṛttau tu etasya pratīcaḥ pratītihi sadātmanā sphuṭam bhavet. I am rearranging the words so that it can become a sentence easy to understand. Asat nivṛttau, when the unreal is removed, tu, indeed, etasya pratīcaḥ, of this etasya pratīcaḥ, of this individual self, of this inner self, pratītihi, realization of oneness. With what? sadātmanā, with the eternal self, sphuṭam bhavet, becomes clear. What is said? When the impurity of unreal upadhis is removed, the oneness of the individual self with the supreme eternal self becomes clear. When the impurity of mud is removed, water remains pure. In the same way, when the unreal is removed, when the identification with the upadhis is removed, the self, the individual self, the jiva's identity, oneness with the supreme self becomes clear. Okay? Tatah, therefore, nirāsah karanīyah eva. Removal should be done. Removal of what? Ahamādi vastunaḥ, of ego, etc., of ahankara, etc. So ahankara, etc. should be removed. Sadhu, well, completely. From what? Sadātmanā, from the eternal self. So from the self, you remove the not self. Starting from ahankara, everything else is not self. Remove it. Everything is mud. Remove it. And the water will remain pure. there is issue with listening. Okay? Try to find spiritual solution. Who has problem listening? Who has problem speaking? Both are individuals only. For the self, there is no problem. Only when I am identifying with the body, I have problem listening, I have problem talking. When I am not identified with the body, when this ignorance, when this impurity, when this fault of identification is removed, the pure self has no problem. I am that pure self and not the upadhis. Now, Shankaracharya ji, after explaining, so we saw that the topic started with Vijnanamaya Kosha. Vijnanamaya Kosha was being explained. Now, while explanation of Vijnanamaya Kosha, Ahankara was explained as beginningless. So, the question of student came, if it is beginningless, it will not end. If it does not end, the samsara will not end. If samsara doesn't end, then I will not get moksha. Then why am I studying Vivekachoodamani? That is the question that student had asked. Answer was that though it is beginningless, it is not endless. Why? Because it is imagined. And anything that is imagined will end when the reality is seen. The real self has no connection, actual connection with the upadhis or the world. And therefore, on realizing my oneness with the self, the individuality will end, suffering, samsara will end. Now, Vijnanamaya Kosha topic has to be completed. That is what Shankaracharya does in the next verse, where he gives reasons why I am not Vijnanamaya Kosha. Like he has given reasons in all the previous three koshas. Remember, why I am not Annamaya Kosha? Because it is seen. I can see the body. Because it is perishable and therefore I am. Example, etc., etc. In the same way, now he gives reasons why I am not the Vijnanamaya Kosha. Let us read verse number 206. Ato nāyam parātmā syāt vijñānamaya shabdabhāk vikāritvāt jadattvāc parichhinnatva hetutah दृश्यत्वाद् व्यभिचारित्वात् नानित्यो नित्य इष्यते. Too low pitch it has become, little higher. Ato nāyam parātmā syāt vijñānamaya shabdabhāk vikāritvāt jadattvāc parichhinnatva hetutah drishyatvat vyabhicharitvat nānityo nitya ishyate. Atah, therefore means concluding a topic. What is the topic and with what you are concluding? Ayam paratma vijñānamaya shabdabhāk na syāt. Ayam paratma, this self, this supreme self, na syāt, cannot be vijñānamaya shabdabhāk, that which is spoken of as vijñānamaya. That intellectual sheath is not me. Why? Why are you saying that it is not me? The reasons are given now. Vikāritvat, because it changes, it modifies. Ahankara becomes karta bhokta. Remember, the individual becomes the doer, the enjoyer, the knower, the desirer, etc., etc. It modifies, but the self does not modify. Therefore, I am not Vijñānamaya Kosha. Jadattvāc, and also it is jada. Jada means it is inert. Remember, ahankara is also jada. That ahankara is always associated with the reflection of consciousness. Therefore, it appears to be sentient. It is not sentient by nature. That sentiency is coming from the self alone. It itself is jada. It itself is inert. Jadatvat. Parichinnatva hetutah, because of the reason of it being limited. That's the biggest problem of individuality, that I feel limited. Why? Because I feel that I am identified only with the one set of upadhis, and therefore it is considered limited. That is another reason why I am not Vijnanamaya Kosha. Next one, Drishyatvat. It is seen. Vijnanamaya Kosha is seen. I am able to see my knowledge. I am able to see my understanding. I know what I know and I know what I don't know. Isn't it? Some classes you feel that I am not understanding anything. Now remember, I am understanding that I am not understanding anything. In other words, I know that the intellect is not understanding anything. I am able to see my intellect. Anything that is seen is not me. Why? Because anything that is seen, yad drishyam tad jadam, is inert. Yad jadam tad nashwaram, is perishable. Yan nashwaram tad mithya, is unreal. Yan mithya tad asat, is non-existent. And therefore, I am able to see my intellect. I am able to see Vijnanamaya Kosha, and therefore I am not Vijnanamaya Kosha. Yo yasya drashta satasmad bhinnaha. All these things we have seen earlier. I am not telling anything new. One who is the seer of something is different from that thing. Ghatasya drashta ghatad bhinnaha. The seer of the pot is different from the pot. In the same way, Vijnanamaya Koshasya drashta Vijnanamaya Koshad bhinnaha. The seer of the intellectual sheath is different from the intellectual sheath. Since I can see intellectual sheath, I am not intellectual sheath. Drishyatvat. Vyabhicharitvat. Beautiful word. Vyabhicharitvat. Because it is not of one nature, its nature changes. Vyabhichara means changing nature, having changing nature. Vyabhichari, one which has vyabhichara, one which has the nature which is changing. Why its nature is changing? Because it sometimes knows, it sometimes doesn't know. Sometimes it is happy, sometimes it is sad, sometimes it feels elated, sometimes it feels depressed. Its nature changes. But my nature never changes. I am always of the nature of existence, consciousness, bliss. And therefore, I am not the Vijnanamaya Kosha which changes. Right? Na anityaha nityaha ishyate. Anityaha, impermanent, nityaha na ishyate, can never be considered as permanent or real. Vijnanamaya Kosha is impermanent. Jiva is also anitya. Please understand the word anitya. It is anadi and anitya. Whereas self is anadi and nitya. Jiva may be anadi, but it is anitya. And because it is anitya, it is not me. I am nitya. And therefore, even this Vijnanamaya Kosha is not me. So far, Shankaracharya has explained Annamaya Kosha and how I am not Annamaya Kosha. Pranamaya Kosha and how I am not Pranamaya Kosha. Manomaya Kosha and how I am not Manomaya Kosha. And now he has completed explanation of Vijnanamaya Kosha and how I am not Vijnanamaya Kosha. In between the explanation of Vijnanamaya Kosha, question by student arose that if Jiva Bhava is Anadi, then it will be always there. Then samsara will not end and I will not get moksha. The teacher answered, it is Anadi doesn't mean it is Nitya. It will end. Why? Because it is imagined. And imagination ends when the reality is seen. Therefore, don't worry. Jiva Bhava will end when Atma Bhava is experienced. Therefore, put efforts in discriminating the self from the not self, by which real knowledge will be born of oneness of the Supreme with the individual self. By that, Jivatva individuality will end, samsara will end, ajnana will end, and moksha will be gained. Now what? Now the last kosha, Anandamaya kosha. The description begins from next verse, verses 207 to 211. So the topic of koshas also will conclude with this section, which we will see in the next session. All right. Let us conclude. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Hari Om.